Hey y'all, it's Creature from Drop Dead Ink as always, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about needles, tattoo needles and tubes, different types, couple of things anybody interested in getting a tattoo should probably look out for. I did a video on this before and come to find out the sound didn't really work too good, so let's try another one as soon as I get my jams going here. So there's a couple of basic kinds of needles as far as most tattooists use. You have your round liners. So there's little codes on the back of these packages. Basically, as far as what type of liner it would be, like they're number 12 needles, thus being the first couple codes. So this is a 7 round liner. Basically with any liner needle, they're just basically soldered to a point as opposed to like a round shader. And this I have, as you can tell by the code, that's a 14 round shader, number 12 needles, but a 14 round shader. The difference between round shaders and round liners are basically these are like soldered straight out instead of to a point. I remember when I was getting apprentice years ago, I used to have to make needles because they didn't really have pre-made needles at the time, and that's one thing I definitely don't miss. So round shaders are particularly good with like really seriously color packing, especially smaller tattoos, because a 14 round shader probably covers about as much space as like a 5 mag. So generally for smaller tattoos these are better, or for cosmetic tattooing. You have basically flat needles, and again I'll check the code there. Number 12 needles, and this is a 6 flat. I'll tell you why I particularly like flats. So these are basically just soldered on a bar, but they're just soldered in a flat configuration. And then what most people today use for shaders are magnums. This is a big 15 mag. So that's like big beefy rake. And the thing is with magnums, basically there's one row of needles soldered on top of another row of needles. So yeah, I don't know, magnums are great. For some reason, like when I first started tattooing, flats were like kind of the thing. They didn't really have magnums out then, but once people started selling pre-made needles, these seem to be the big thing. Flats, I will say, are kind of hard to find. I'll get into that in a little bit. So those are basically your needle configurations, and I will explain why I particularly like flats. As far as disposable tubes go, generally there's a few different types of tattoo needle tubes. So you have like, these are called tube stems, and basically there's like metal grips or rubber grips, or you can get like foam grips that just go over these. So these are tube stems, and this is, again, there's little codes on the back. So this is 8 round, so that would go with my 7 liner needle. They come in different colors too, so the one thing you always need to watch out for, especially anybody out there who's interested in getting a tattoo, not only to make sure these needles and tubes get open in front of you, but to make sure they have little indicator strips in them. And usually the indicator strips will turn blue when they've been through like a chemical like a gas sterilization process. So just because needles are brand new doesn't mean they're sterile. Like these can come off a production line, hypothetically, if someone were to get poked while making them, you never can be too careful. So, and I will say, as far as sterilization goes, there's a couple things that don't sterilize anything, and a few of those things are putting a lighter to needles doesn't sterilize anything. The sterilization comes from heat under pressure. Putting them in a crock pot isn't the same thing as an autoclave. Putting them in a toaster oven as opposed to a dry heat sterilizer isn't the same. And there is a few different cold sterilization methods, like Sidex is a chemical you can use to do like a cold sterilization process. But anyway, anybody out there, you really want to make sure, and again with the needles, that they have these little indicators in them to say that they've been through a sterilization process. You can also get, the needle right in the tube. I just kind of buy whatever because I like experimenting. Like these, I like with the grips on them, especially when I'm using coil machines. I use the tube stems a lot with like a steel grip when I'm using rotaries because it kind of makes up the weight. And this is like a 9 mag curve. Oh yeah, so there's a difference between mags and mag curves or mag rounds too. So this is like a 15 mag straight. So they're basically soldered on all straight across with magnums, and this is going to be kind of hard to see in the package. But basically, so there's 5 needles soldered on the bottom row and 4 needles soldered on the top, and on the sides, the 2 end needles are kind of like ducked a little bit lower. I will say one thing about curved or round mags, depending on where you get them from. They seem to be they're soldered on a little bit tighter. So, like say a 9 mag would take up about as much space as like a 7 mag straight. But these seem to be soldered together a little tighter. So I kind of like the rounds in that aspect. Even though, so a 9 mag again would be about the same coverage as like a 7 mag straight. I'm not really sure why they do that. Like I say, I never really, soldered magnums. But needless to say, you can get grips right, the needle in tube with the grips right on them. There's different types. The one thing you have to watch out for is to make sure there's those indicator strips in them. And then, like way back in the day, like we all used to use, are these all stainless steel. Sometimes they're aluminum. I don't really use these. I just have a ton of them left over from back in the early 90s. And those definitely need to be gone through like a complete, cleaned with an ultrasonic cleaner. Not just rinsed out and wire brushed. You have to use like an ultrasonic cleaner and then sterilize them afterwards in an autoclave, a dry heat sterilizer, or a chemical sterilizer such as Sidex. And there's another name of a brand out there, but they'll say cold sterilization right on them. And any reputable tattoo company will sell those. They're a little expensive, like by the gallon, and they only have like a 28-day cycle before they're no good. So you have to kind of use them up within that time period. So you'll notice, anyway, you can buy these, obviously, these sterilization pouches, and anybody that would have ever used any kind of stainless steel tube before would buy these pouches. This is the thing anybody new to tattooing should really watch out for, clients, because people can buy these pouches, and so if you see any big pouch getting open in front of you, if there's needles in it, I hate to say it, but whoever's, make sure there's at least an indicator strip in them, because it's pretty easy. Like you'll notice with regular needles, the packages, they're plastic, it has like a plastic covering, I suppose, to prevent any kind of pokage. And they're really small and tight to the needle. So if anybody out there, you see an artist or a tattooist or a person who does tattoos, there's a big difference, that has needles in a big long pouch like this, I would probably assume that they're reusing them. Because again, you can buy these pouches, and anybody that's ever had to sterilize a stainless steel tube probably has those pouches. But again, with like disposable tubes, there's not really one set kind that's, right or wrong, and they do have different colors. Some of them are clear. I got these black ones from Unimax. I was getting these a lot for a while, and then because I kind of drifted into using rotaries, not that I use them all the time, but whatever. And I do use like metal screw-on grips that, of course, just because the grips are just grips, those two have to be gone through a complete sterilization process. When these tubes get thrown away after each use. There's cartridge needles. We all know about cartridges probably. I have some of those in here. Maybe I'll get into those in another video. I'm not a big fan of cartridge needles personally because they sort of reset themselves differently than like a one-piece needle on the bar. I'm not really a huge fan of cartridges. They definitely work a little bit differently than like the one-piece bar with the needles on them. And one thing I should now, this is something else for artists to watch out for. Usually, what happens, and here's, well, no, here's a perfect example right here. So generally, when you, and I got my little 14 round beater needle on this old 1968 machine. So generally, when you put the needles on your armature bar, the little eyelet, as it's called, will always have an opening to the right, or it should always have an opening to the right. But so what you want to look for when you're putting your needles on is the needles that when they're soldered on, they're basically soldered on the bottom of the bar, and that part goes on the bottom of your tube. But don't always assume that just because your eyelet's to the right that that's going on right. Here's a perfect example, because these things get so mass produced, anybody can make mistakes. So as you can see, the needles drop down, they're soldered on the bottom of the bar, but the eyelet, the opening in the eyelet is on the left, so don't just loop them on and automatically assume they're right. Artists out there, you have to make sure that the needles are always soldered on the bottom. This one is upside down in the package, so when that would get flipped up, the eyelet would be on the right. Another one that's upside down because the eyelet would be on the right. Let's see about this one. Yeah, again, it's upside down in the package, but the eyelet would be on the right. But this one is right side up and the eyelet's on the right. So just make sure when you guys are out there, setting up your machines, that doesn't really matter which way the eyelet is, as long as when the needles are on, how they're soldered on is on the bottom, that's on the bottom of your tube. And generally what myself and most tattooists do is give like a little tiny bend in the middle of the needle bar, and that will kind of make up for your needle tensioner or your rubber bands. So just like a tiny, like I'll take this out of the package and kind of just little tiny bend in the middle. So the reason why I personally like flats, besides using them for like ever, and I got like my little 14 round beater needle set up on this real heavy 1968 coil machine that I still use today. But what I will say, and I'm going to use this little, my little jar of ink cups an example. So when you're using anything but flats, what's really important is, so supposing this is like an arm shoulder, and I have a round shader in this. Basically when you're tattooing, I'm going to get my machine out there, it's the best I can show you. In order to get the full effect of magnums or rounds shaders, you always have to have your machine your tube totally horizontal with the skin. So basically if you're tattooing an arm, you go up the arm like this, keep in mind the machine, because what happens, and especially with coil machines, I even catch myself doing it, they are a little bit heavier. So what happens is, if you're not paying attention or whatever, your wrists will kind of sag a little bit. If you're coloring like that, and you should always color in like a small circular motion, that's usually the best way to color anything. Obviously, there's different fanning techniques for like gray wash, or if you get in corners, you might have to squeak it in there a little bit. But basically, if you're coloring any wide area, you just want to use like small circles and almost use it like a lawnmower. So if you're going up, now again, this has to be, I have a round shader in here that I just use to like set all my machines with. So in order for me to get the full effect of those 14 round needles, I have to have that machine totally horizontal with the skin. And as you go up, now you're getting onto, say, the shoulder again, that has to curve and be completely horizontal with the skin, or else you're only using a portion of the needles, which I think probably a ton of people, just not paying attention, or for whatever reason, again, maybe on the side. So basically, as I'm going up on this area, again, completely horizontal. At this point it's almost vertical, but it has to be perfectly flat on the skin, basically. So again, you're going up the arm, say, it would be like this. As you move up to the shoulder, just make sure all those needles are touching the skin, basically, or you're only using a portion of them. And I think a lot of times with like magnum needles, a lot of people just usually end up using the bottom row because their wrist will sag a little bit. The thing is, with flats, you don't really have to worry about that so much because it's just one flat row of needles, so you're always getting those 6 flat needles, or whatever the grouping may be. So if I had a flat and I'm moving up, I can kind of sag it a little bit and I'm still getting those 6 flats. But again, you want to go in like a small circular motion, almost like a lawnmower, like cover, a row, cover another row. With like a liner needle, you kind of want, I'll see if I can kind of do it like, so again, say this is the skin. You almost want to go at a little bit of an angle when you're doing your line work. Some artists, I've heard of artists, they call it pushing or pulling your liners. I've always pushed them, which is going that way. Some artists, for some reason, I've heard of people pulling them towards them. Whatever, I guess, whatever works. I was always taught, push them. And you can go at a little bit of like a 45-degree angle, especially if you want to make wider lines. Then, like if you have like a 7 round and you want to get a little bit wider of a line, you can go in at a little bit of an angle and it'll actually make the lines a little bit wider. Or if you want like a super, just that 7 or say like super fine line, like with a 3 needle liner, if you go more like, horizontal or vertical, whatever the case may be, but basically having it like you would when you're shading, have the point of that needle perfectly, say in this case if it were the shoulder, perfectly straight up and down like that, you'll get a real fine line. If you go in at a little bit of an angle like that, you'll get a little bit of a thicker line. Just a couple things to keep in mind. And I think, again, a lot of times when you're using, like this old 1968 machine literally weighs a ton, you know what I mean? Like, especially in comparison to rotaries. You can see it's got a little wear and tear on it, but I still use it. It's old Stan Moskowitz, Bowery Stan Moskowitz, 1968 liner. Again, a couple things just to kind of go over with you guys. Hopefully it helps a little bit. But again, I personally like flats just for the sake that if your wrist does sag a little bit, you're still getting that same grouping of needles. And again, like I say, guys, and I know a lot of guys out there, artists out there, and you gals, of course, too, that just make the mistake of when you're trying to cover areas, unless you're really taught how to do it. Well, one good thing I would say to do to anybody interested in tattooing is buy like a coloring book and some colored pencils and practice coloring, and you'll notice like you get a lot thicker coverage when you go in like small circular motions like that. Like again, so if I'm like, say I'm tattooing someone's thigh and I'm trying to hold this machine up and down like that to do it, it does get a little tiring after a while. So again, this is my 14 round shader that I use as a beater needle to set my machines with. So if I'm coloring a thigh, I got to hold that machine perfectly vertically up and down to get the full 14 needles. So if it sags a little bit, I'm only getting a portion of those needles. If I'm using a flat and it sags a little bit, chances are I'm still getting those 6 or whatever the grouping may be. But I had that 6 flat out there, so it's stuck in my head. I try not to, promote any tattoo companies on this channel or slam any tattoo companies. You probably heard me saying some negative things about Cheyenne junk, which it is. But I will say, if anybody out there is interested in buying flats and they're really good quality, especially for an overseas company, www.focustattoosupply.com. It's FOCUS. I think they have a Facebook page too, and they sell flat shaders from 4s all the way up to 15s. And actually, a 15 flat, since it is a flat shader, will actually cover more space than a 15 Magnum, because again, these are one row of needles soldered on top of another. So when you get a 15 flat, like it's huge, it's like a rake. So again, and with the disposable tubes, there's not like really a wrong or right. Like again, sometimes they're colored, sometimes they're, just white like this. You can also get, you can also get just tube tips, like disposable tube tips that go in stainless steel tubes. And even if you use a disposable tip, that stainless steel or aluminum, whatever the case may be, that tube, even though the tips get chucked, you guys, you have to throw or either sterilize those stainless steel tubes or aluminum tubes, whatever the case may be, or throw them away afterwards. It horrifies me to think of how many people are out there using pens and stuff like that that don't even use any kind of like a pen bag or a protective covering that covers the complete pens, because once you use that without a covering on it, that pen is cross-contaminated and you can't sterilize the whole pen. So you can't assume that just because your friend or whoever you tattoo looks healthy that they are really, they don't have anything. And all it takes is one infection, or certainly spreading hepatitis or something like that, and it'll ruin your career before it even gets off the ground. I've seen a lot of artists, make that mistake. Even with drawing on the skin, like I do a lot of, freehand work. I have pens and stuff up here, but you can get like sterile skin scribes, which are, fairly inexpensive, and they come packaged like this. You should only use sterile skin scribes and not use a pen to keep on reusing a pen to draw on somebody's skin, because the time you draw on it, it's usually shaved by then. The area should be shaved. You can get little nicks in someone's skin that'll actually bleed, and you won't even be able to see the infected blood. So you don't want to keep on using a pen, like a regular ballpoint pen, to just keep on drawing on somebody. I think I've gone over another video as far as setting up your tattoo area. Back in the day, a lot has changed since when I first started tattooing. Like, we used to typically use speed stick to put stencils on with. Now you can get like Surgilube, which works really good. Actually, KY jelly works pretty good, or generic KY jelly works really good to put stencils on with. Or there's a stuff called, I wish I had the bottle out here, but Dettol number 16, which is a first aid antiseptic, and it's a liquid form, so it is an antiseptic. And this stuff, I use either or, because of course this is a liquid, so you want to kind of lightly spray it on, but it does run a little bit, so depending on the area, I'll either use like Surgilube or some type of KY jelly, or that Dettol number 16. You can even use green soap, which is like the soap you would use to tattoo with, to clean the area with. I know there's something else, like there's Intense Cleanse that I just bought recently. I haven't quite used it yet as far as to use during the process, but like Tincture green soap has always been, hold on a second you guys. So like when you're doing a tattoo, you would want to use Tincture green soap, which is a surgical soap. You don't just pour dial in a bottle or rubbing alcohol. Certainly not rubbing alcohol in a bottle, because not only will it like completely sting and really suck when you're doing for your client, but it doesn't work as good as this. So Tincture green soap, and you can dilute it, to use it when you're tattooing. There's another thing called blue soap out now too, which whatever, that's for use, but this has always been like the old standby for like years and years. And then, even stuff like this Maticide germicidal solution for, say, wiping down furniture, or like, I have the stainless steel tray. And if you watch my video about setting up your work area, like I'll put aluminum foil inside this tray, then I have these styrofoam like dishes basically, and I'll put that on top of the aluminum foil. Put a little glop of Vaseline, and I'll kind of stick my ink cups right to that styrofoam. There's ink cup holders, which are like a cross-contamination nightmare, because not too many people, probably have autoclaves, but those ink cup holders, like that are stainless steel, those two have to be completely sterilized every time you use them, so they're kind of not really practical to use. So yeah, check out that video about setting up your tattoo workstation. But I hope this covered a little bit as far as helping you guys with the needle situation, and as far as how to use them. Again, feel free to like message me. I think you can message on this. I'm on Facebook, Drop Dead Ink, and it's INC. On Instagram, Drop Dead Ink Custom Tattoo. Right here, my phone number is area code 413-329-0868. Feel free to call or text anybody out there that has any questions. I'd be happy to help as best I could. As always, think ink, be safe, and see ya.